All right.
Yes,
I'm doing great. Hopefully, you are doing great also. I have your
I
book.
am.
I have your book here.
Great.
Soul Journey Through the Tarot. So why don't we just kick it off? I mean, these tend to be kind of conversational in format, but our audience loves tarot, so they're definitely familiar with the subject matter. But let me ask you. Let me just start off. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your book and the core. Maybe if you want to communicate the core message of why you wrote this book, Soul Journey Through the Tarot.
Okay. Well, originally the book was written as a correspondence course. So it was written for the purpose of teaching the tarot. And then I think one of the main points of the book is the way it synthesizes different structures together, the structure of astrology, structure of numerology, and then the structure of the tarot, along with other things such as colors and plants, things like that. The tarot is like astrology in that it does not relate to just one thing, it relates to everything. It's a mirror of the totality. So I'm an astrologer. I started out when I was 18 years old. I'm 75 years old now. And then about the early 1970s, I was attracted to the book, The Sacred Tarot by C.C. Zane, who founded the Church of Light. And so I very avidly digested that book and loved it. And that's what got me started on teaching tarot. And in terms of the message in the book, I think there's two things that stand out to me. One is the numbering system of the minor arcana, which I've been exploring now for maybe 30 or 40 years. And at first, I was very unsure if it actually worked or to what extent it might work. I've decided it's a built-in thing now in my world. And whenever there's something really new brought to a science or a study, I think it's important to have a lot of information on it. So I'm actually working on writing a second book that will just be on the minor arcana
Gotcha.
and with the numbering system.
So why should somebody study tarot? I mean, it's definitely not the most no pun intended, it's not the most intuitive thing to get into, even though it exercises your intuition. Like you're saying, there's so much to learn. Why should somebody in 2023, almost 2024, study this very old system?
Well, if you study it, I think in the right way, it exposes you to divine harmony. It imprints you with that. So it has an elevating effect on the mind and on the vibrations. And it can be a real source of spiritual information and guidance.
What is it about tarot that is unlike other things like I Ching or runes or magic 8 balls that
Well,
is
actually,
special?
what is the second thing you mentioned after I Ching?
Runes.
Oh, yes. Well, it's very much like those things. And it's really very much like astrology, too. If we compare it to the I Ching has a longer, more unbroken history connected with it. The tarot was always kind of on the fringe, really, of society, whereas the I Ching was in the heart of their society. It was part of their whole way of living and way of thinking. But certainly the I Ching can do everything the tarot can do, and I'm sure that the runes can as well. So in those terms, it's just another system.
That's such an interesting point, though, and I haven't considered that the I Ching was at the center of Chinese society. I mean, it was kind of like the manual for civil servants. And
Exactly.
the tarot has always been a fringe pursuit, much like esotericism itself in Western culture. It's always been on the
Yes.
fringe. Why do you think that is? I mean, and obviously those are two totally different types of societies that have produced different results. But why do you think that it's always been pushed to the fringes? Now it's
Well,
not. Now it's very popular, but
yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is that the I Ching relates to the Chinese religious beliefs. So, like in our society, we have like the Bible, which relates to our religious beliefs. But so many people think that the tarot is something apart from religion, or it's not spiritual or like that. So I think it has a lot to do with the way it's labeled or identified, the way it's seen.
Aleister Crowley referred to the tarot as a book, the book of Thoth, and as the ultimate
Yes,
book
I
of
love
magic
that.
and the ultimate book of magic and of initiation. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I do.
What is it about tarot that makes it into that?
The vibration of it. The To me, the heart of the tarot is numbers. When you start studying these numbers like 21, 56, that's the number of minor arcana, 78, the numbers for the whole tarot. When you start looking more deeply into them, they're very significant. They're very important. And so I taught energy work at a massage school for about 10 years. And one of the things I taught, I didn't teach a whole course on it. I don't think people were kind of ready for that, but was on healing with numbers.
Okay.
Actually, where you project numbers to people for the purpose of healing various problems they might have. And this can be done through rationality, or it can just be done purely intuitively. And as the tarot's basis to me is numbers, then the tarot it certainly is a vehicle of healing.
When you say healing, do you mean like spiritual healing specifically, or something else?
Yes, I mean, actually, what I really mean by healing is the fostering of the evolution of consciousness. I believe, as the Buddhists believe, that we're all moving toward enlightenment and we're all going to get there. But it'd be nice to make the journey have less suffering and hardship associated with it.
And you feel that that's where the tarot can be a guide?
Yes, exactly.
Gotcha. So if somebody is just getting into tarot, it's a pretty big field. If someone's just starting to learn tarot, how should they go about that?
Well, of course, my first response is to say, study my book. But there are other books out there in the tarot. And, Jason, I get the impression that you're very knowledgeable about the field, knowing authors, knowing books, knowing what's out there and like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not very knowledgeable on those things. So it's hard for me to say what other books they might study.
Well, it might not be books necessarily, but just kind of advice in general for how to start how to and maybe an intuitive. I'm guessing you approach it maybe in a more intuitive way, and maybe talk about that and how you've approached it.
Yeah, well, I love the symbology of it, and to me, the symbols are living beings, and they can speak to you. And so I'd say just allow the cards to speak to you. I think because I'm an astrologer, and that's my major thing, that I've probably made my book complicated, because astrologers tend to be into complexity. And I would say, if you're going to read my book and you come across things you don't understand, just kind of gloss over them. In other words, don't feel like you have to take the information in a rational, objective way. Just see what speaks to you as you read, and let the vibrations of the words just kind of osmose into you.
Okay. What if they are just picking up tarot itself for the first time and not necessarily your book? I'm sure you have advice in the book about how to begin learning and integrating tarot.
Yes. Well, one thing that one can always do is simply lay out the cards and then see what comes to you, and follow that, and set the intention that you desire for the tarot to stimulate and open up your own intuition.
Do you feel that that's what the tarot is for?
What?
Well, you kind of described it as a tool for opening up your intuition.
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
Talk about that.
I think of the tarot as a mirror. So what we really want to do is make sure the mirror doesn't have a lot of junk or grease on it. We want to see clearly into the mirror, so we want to try to clean the mirror.
What was that process like for you of cleaning the mirror? Maybe there's some, if you can relate some stories from that process of as you were beginning to work through the tarot, however long that lasted for you.
That's an interesting question. I think I have a kind of unique relationship with the world of the intuition. Because on the one hand, I own that I'm very intuitive. But my problem is that so often I don't know what the nature is of what I'm picking up on. I don't know where it's coming from or what it means like that, you know? So my challenge has been to try to understand that. And I've been working with that for a long time, and it's really helped. And then one thing I always say about the tarot is you're going to get out of it what you put into it. In that respect, I compare it to such things as a piano. You get out of a piano what you put into it, you know? And so it's very important to bring to it a positive intent and a high intent. And then to ask. And then when you feel like you're getting results, like getting answers, it's very important to follow their guidance and to try to invent actions that are based on the guidance you're getting. Because if you do that, it creates a cycle. It cycles the energy. It tends to suck more out of the tarot. And then the more you use that, you know, the more the tarot, you're in tune with it.
That's really interesting. Let's talk about that, because I think one thing that I've noticed, and that I think probably people who work with divination, which is quite a lot of people who listen to this show, have probably noticed, there's always a tendency, I noticed particularly with the I Ching, there's always a tendency to ask again. It's like, oh no, that can't be the answer. You know, it's like let's maybe I got that wrong. Talk about that process, because it occurs to me that what you're talking, and I love that phrase, inventing actions. It occurs to me that kind of, you know, not second guessing is a big part of the art, and figuring out what's an actual transmission and what's not, or what's a correct interpretation and what's not. Talk about that process and navigating those waters.
Okay. Well, first I want to tell you a little joke, and this is a joke, Kabbalah. It's just a Kabbalah story where the guy goes to the rabbi and says, "Rabbi, I keep praying to God. I pray and I pray and I pray, and God just does not hear my prayers." And the rabbi says, "Yeah, God hears your prayers, and the answer is no." So, you know, sometimes it's hard to do a reading for yourself. And the more invested you are emotionally into the answer, then I think the harder that can make it. But one thing I think it's great to do is to keep a tarot journal. And so if you ask a question, write down the cards you get. And that way, see, most people think, oh, I love it when, you know, like I ask the tarot a question and I lay out the cards and it's all clear. I really clearly see what the answer is. I clearly understand. That's great. But you know, when you ask the tarot a question, you lay out the cards and you don't understand it at all, I think that's a wonderful thing, because you're at the cutting edge of your understanding right there. And if you can work to understand what those cards mean in that context, then you're making progress, you're learning. You're getting into the deeper meanings of the cards. And so often too, you know, and I see this in astrology a lot too, people will get a particular notion in their head what Libra means, or Aries or Taurus or Mars or something like that. And so then when they look at a chart, they always go to that meaning that they're accustomed to. When actually these things, you know, if you look at 1 degree of latitude or 1 degree of longitude in the sky through a gigantic telescope, you're going to see millions of galaxies in that little teeny sliver of the sky. So astrology and tarot are like that too. These things are very, very vast and they're very deep. And so oftentimes the one idea you have about Arcanum 7 doesn't fit the answer. But if you look deeper into Arcanum 7, you can see other facets of it, other ways to apply it, other meanings. And that can enrich your understanding of that card.
So what is
Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. That I really like that. And it seems like, I mean, I feel like that's probably the way to improve any skill, just getting to the edge of your comfort zone. That makes sense. Yeah. So go ahead.
Well, and getting to the edge of your comfort zone is about taking risks. And there's a reason why they referred to alchemy as the ars regia, or the royal art. Because really, I think anybody that picks up the tarot or any of these kind of things, it's like picking up a paintbrush. You're an artist. And the whole deal with being an artist is you need to take risks. Because risks are what grow you and expand you. And of course, we've all taken a big risk just by taking on a human body. That's a huge risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you kind of just, you decided before you were born that you were going to be an artist. Anybody that comes into a human body is an artist.
What do you mean by that specifically?
Oh, that, Seth, speaking through Jane Roberts, told us that we create our own reality. So you look around you and you think it's all out there, but it's all really in you, and you're creating it. So this is your art. Everybody's life is their art.
And from my experience, one of the trickiest things about tarot readings or esotericism in general is kind of getting to the understanding that you just expressed, which is that it's all internal, not external. But from then negotiating, understanding other people are in the same position. And I think a tarot reading is an excellent opportunity to kind of figure that boundary out. Is that kind of talk about that a bit? I mean, like, how do you, for instance, when you're giving a reading, I mean, maybe the question is as simple as when you're giving somebody a reading, how do you get your ego out of the way? But really, it's how do you tell the difference between yourself and the other person? Because I've had tons of tarot readings that seem to have been through a clear channel. And then I've had tons of tarot readings where the person seems to be projecting stuff about themselves on me. So
when they're projecting stuff on you, that's why I use the metaphor of the greasy mirror. It's got dust and grease and gunk on it, so they can't see you because they're looking at their junk on the surface of the mirror. And so I love psychotherapy. But of course, there's a problem with that. There's a lot of psychotherapists out there that aren't very good. But I have been blessed in my lifetime with having spent time in therapy with some very good ones. And they've helped me immensely. And I think the more we see ourselves, the more we come to know who we are, that's what will help of getting the ego out of the way. And I very much adhere to the ideas of Kabbalah, and really, Kabbalah equates the ego with Satan. They think of the ego as really the source of all suffering.
Yeah.
And I can certainly see that.
Yeah. That's a tricky one, though, because, our society demands you to have an ego. And so that's a tricky navigation.
It does, yes.
And that's certainly something that I think tarot readers and astrologers, because it's a job that they basically have to navigate that boundary professionally, I think tend to be really good at that.
Yes.
So I'm also curious, you said you're 75, how has your perspective on tarot changed over your life? Has it gone through phases, different interpretations?
Yes. I have Mercury in Gemini. Mercury rules Gemini. And so I have a very strong Mercury, and then it's conjunct Uranus. And those two planets are opposed Jupiter. So I'm kind of interested in everything. And what I love about the tarot and astrology is I can relate everything to those things. I really love that. And I used to be really into the rationalistic sort of side. I'd say, just to generally answer your question, the drift in my life has been from the intellectual to the intuitive more and more and more. And it's not that I don't think highly of the intellectual. I think it's a wonderful thing. It's just that less and less is it my bag.
Less and less is what clarify that last point, please. I'm not sure I understood.
Well, it's kind of like when I used to do tarot readings earlier on, I would try to figure out meanings in the cards, figure out how they applied and make sense and justify so that if anybody asked me, I could write it down almost like a legal brief. And now it's much more watery now. It's just kind of feeling into the cards, almost like an anemone putting out feelers, just feeling around in the energy and feeling what I'm feeling. And then for me in a reading, when I'm doing a reading for someone and I'm talking to them, sometimes my words feel kind of vague or like more like echoes. They have a weakness about them. And that's telling me that, no, this is not where you need to be going. And then sometimes I'll say something and it's like, oh my God, it's like on a billboard. It feels clear and sparkling. Yes, that's what you need to say to them. That's it. Go, and then I'll go for that. And invariably that turns out to be that's it. That's it.
Do you think that that's a faculty? What do you think that faculty is? And do you think it do you consider that psychic? Do you feel it's just intuitive? Do you feel that is developed by tarot? Was it something natural to you? Like, where did that faculty come from?
Well, first of all, I tend to think that everybody has it. I think it's very natural. Yeah. And I'm sorry, what was the other part of your question?
What was the other part of my question?
I was going to say
I can't remember.
I kind of short it out. The reason I shorted out is I was thinking about space aliens.
Oh, well, tell me about that then.
Well, so often when people have encounters with them, like they don't speak, but they hear what they're saying in their head, and I think that's what we're all evolving toward.
Okay.
It's just intuitive communication. We just can intuitively communicate.
Yeah. I mean, I think we already do to a large extent already.
Oh, yeah.
Including at a distance.
I think we do.
Including at a distance. So.
Yeah. But I would say that unfortunately, a lot of times that gets kind of ignored.
Yeah.
In other words, like you're getting signals from someone, but most people are taught to ignore those, to kind of just go for what is rational and makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me that really the process of learning whatever you want to call it, Kabbalah, magic, astrology, tarot, psychic arts, all of this stuff, really a lot of it does come down to learning how to turn off that part that sidesteps your intuition or your creativity, your creative impulses, or your imagining, your daydreaming, but that's, of course, people shut that off for a reason, which is it makes it very hard to function in the rational world, and it makes it hard to go to a job and all of that. So talk about the process of navigating that territory of kind of, shutting that off, but in a constructive and healthy way. And you mentioned that you love therapy. For me, therapy was very helpful as part of that process. Magick.me is the world's greatest school for magic, meditation, and mysticism. You can learn everything there, from chaos magic to hermeticism to meditation to how to supercharge your finances and take absolute control of your destiny. In short, you get all of the tools you need to turn chaos into beautiful, scintillating order and master your life. It's incredible. You've probably heard me talk about it on the show quite a lot, but check it out. It's growing fast. And I just want to say, if you're confused about where to start, because I have so many courses there, the Adept Initiative is the place to go. The Adept Initiative is the flagship course on Magick.me, and it contains everything you need to know to master the most profound ancient techniques of changing your consciousness and the most modern and cutting-edge tools and systems for absolutely turning your life into a masterpiece. You are really going to dig it. Go check it out, and I will see you in class. It's magick.me, magick.me.
One day I was sitting talking to my therapist, and I was talking away, and he said, yes, and I see that today you don't want to relate to me. And I said, what? I'm trying to relate to you. And he said, no, I just feel you're really not relating to me. And I said, well, I'm trying to. And he goes, no, wait a minute. He said, there's nothing wrong with not wanting to relate to me. There's nothing wrong with that. He said, what I want to do is just make you aware of that. But it's okay if you feel that way, if you don't want to relate today, that's okay. And it was just like this dawning piece of insight to me. It was like, wow, he's right. Yeah, I don't want to relate. And so that's why I'm talking a mile a minute. You know, it's almost like a bladder screen.
It was to be protective of yourself by not letting someone else speak.
Yeah. And since I have Mercury and Gemini, the way I do it is with a bunch of words.
Yeah.
A Capricorn might do it by just becoming silent, but the Gemini does it with words.
Oh, interesting.
But the point of it was to be aware of what you're doing, to be aware of what's going on inside you. That just feels like the key to the whole thing. And it's so very simple. There was some female Buddhist monk that was dying recently. Someone has told me this story where they asked her, do you have any final words or final advice for us? And she said, yeah, attention, be attentive. And they said, well, anything else? And she said, yeah, be attentive. And then she died, you know? And really, it's just like saying, if you can just be aware of what you're doing, just tune into it. It's the ultimate healing. It's the ultimate meditation and the ultimate healing, I feel.
When you say being aware of what you're doing, do you mean kind of mindfulness in the moment? Do you mean self-observation of patterns that you do? Or what do you mean?
Yeah, the whole thing. And just mindful of what's going on in you. Like my background is in Gestalt therapy.
Okay.
And they're big on putting attention on the body because all our emotions reflect in our body. So when you're having strong emotions, if you start noticing what you're feeling in your body, what the attention does is it heals it. Attention heals.
Yeah, I found the same thing. Have you ever done Vipassana?
No. No.
Well, it's
I've heard of that.
Basically Theravada Buddhism. It's original Buddhism, and it's Thai Buddhism. It's taught all over the world. And I mean, there's a lot to it, but they largely teach it in 10-day meditation retreats where you basically just stay still and pay attention to your body sensations for 10 days.
Yeah, that's exactly it. What I'm talking about.
It's profound. I think that's probably one of the most profound spiritual experiences I've had in my life by far. So
that's wonderful.
I mean, just that blew my mind. It's like, basically everything that I'm doing is just to avoid my body sensations.
Exactly. When your body sensations are unpleasant, we flee from them. And that gets into Arcanum 10, the wheel, where we're trapped in our body. And on that wheel are those two beings, and the wheel is turning and the force is throwing them away from the center. And so when we have very difficult emotions, we fly from the center, we move away from them. But then if we allow ourselves or set the intent to move toward them, then that's what can ultimately take us eventually into the center, which is the place of ultimate healing.
I love that. I never connected those things, and I always love it because I'm also a Kabbalist, and I always love it when I can make a new connection or relate something from another spiritual tradition to the Kabbalah. And I think that, like, thinking of the Wheel of Fortune and the two beasts or the creatures that are on it as attraction and revulsion, craving,
right,
and the Buddhist thing. That's super interesting.
Yeah,
I did make the connection. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I may have even in this retreat thought about the Wheel of Fortune as the wheel of Maya, and that Maya is produced by that constant oscillation. Is my feeling about it. It's not some external force. It's actually the oscillation of the mind between craving and aversion.
Yes, and so you'd probably think of it also as the wheel of karma.
Yes, the Bhava the Bhava chakra. Yeah, I think so. All those things, are in that metaphor.
I just flashed too that the wheel of karma has 8 spokes, and then the two creatures on the wheel make a total of 10, and that's the number of the card. I just flashed.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's very tempting often with tarot to see it as a universal language, or like, oh, these symbols are throughout all religions, and there's like a lot of instances of that being the case. But also
Yes.
I try to resist that a little bit too, because it can be a little bit too cut and dry, I think, right? And miss maybe some details about things, and
Yes.
by shoving them into a filing cabinet that they might not 100% belong in. Maybe they 80% belong in it.
Right. Right. Yeah, the human mind has a tendency to want to put things in little pigeonholes,
Yes.
you know.
That brings me to another question I was going to ask, which is, you were talking about when you get to the edge of your comfort zone in terms of interpreting the cards. Where do you go to for insight on that at that point? Do you just consult your intuition? Do you go, start reading definitions in books? Do you go for an academic source on what the cards mean? Where do you go to learn more when you get pushed to that edge?
Often I'll go to the analyzing of the numbers, seeing if I can see something in that. And then maybe sometimes even doing some free writing, like writing about the situation and how the card might connect. And a lot of times, if I do that, stuff will start coming out. It's like following a path in the forest, and it leads somewhere. You just keep going with it, and it takes you someplace you didn't expect, sort of thing.
Interesting. Very interesting. So the subtitle of your book is Key to a Complete Spiritual Practice. So I'm curious about, going beyond just reading for yourself or for others. How do you approach tarot as a complete spiritual practice?
Meditating on the cards, and also going with the Kabbalistic truth, or truth expressed in Kabbalah, that everything is alive. Yeah, I'm an animist. So the cards are alive, and you can talk to them. And the cards are alive with multiple entities and intelligences, because each card is associated with like an angel, with a plant, with plants, with different things. And so the cards have intelligence, and they have consciousness, and you can ask them things. You can ask the cards for dreams. You can, when you do that free writing I just spoke of, you can set the intent by asking the cards, please help me with this. Please allow whatever needs to come through to come through.
Do you do just a basic 10 card spread, or have you worked with a bunch of different ones, and which ones do you tend to prefer?
I often will just do 3 card spreads: past, present, future, or basis of situation, or of it. And then the third card is what it's moving toward. And then as I work with those, other questions will come up, or I'll have questions in my mind about that. And so I'll lay out more cards.
Gotcha. Are you aware? I'm guessing you're probably aware of how popular tarot has become with young people, like in their late teens and early 20s.
I've been told that, yes.
Yeah, I'm just becoming aware of it now. I mean, I've been peripherally aware of it, but I was not aware of how huge it is. I mean, on TikTok, which I never get on, but on TikTok, the tarot topic, I think, is one of the most popular topics. It's got millions and millions and millions of people following it. And so from what I've been told, there's lots of like young people, like 18, 19 years old, doing lots of YouTubes and TikToks of tarot information. And it's kind of like, from the perspective of someone who's just starting, and that's great. But there's a lot of enthusiasm out there, but not necessarily, they haven't got to even understanding that there actually are right answers, to the card interpretation. There are specific things in the Kabbalah. There are actual attributions. They're still kind of in the, well, if you don't understand it, meditate on it, which is valid, right? But they don't know the type of stuff that's in your book. Right. So I'm not,
yes.
I think that's a positive. I'm sure a lot of people will, those who continue on with it will learn more. But I guess I'm just curious your reaction to that becoming such a popular social trend.
Oh, I think people are just so thirsty for spiritual stuff. It's really what's lacking in our diet culturally. And I make jokes about how there's this huge alien invasion, and this gigantic spaceship hovers over New York, and they send down thousands and thousands of people that swarm out of this spaceship. And it turns out that what these people are therapists. and they're trying to send us help, you know? So I think people are naturally looking for things that would heal them.
Yeah.
And they're looking to the tarot for that, you know?
Maybe, I love that. I mean, maybe that's just the most simple possible answer. I mean, people need something that will heal them. I mean, I think probably most people feel that way. Probably everyone feels that way.
And also there's something very vivid about the tarot's imagery and symbology. It has a real kind of like a psychedelic aura in a way.
Yeah.
And in a way, too, we're kind of returning back to the 1960s. You know,
how so?
Oh, all the interest in drugs. And I see a lot of people, young people dressing, and it reminds me of the 1960s. You know,
what part of the world are you in?
I'm in Kansas City, Missouri.
Oh, wow. Okay. Very cool. My dad is from Kansas City. That's great.
Yeah, I say I live in the buckle of the Bible Belt.
Okay. Well, I live in Austin, Texas, and people are definitely interested in drugs and hippie stuff here. Just not me.
Oh, yes.
I'm too old now, but but yeah, what do you make of that? I mean, it's incontrovertible that people have this intense yearning for spirituality, but it seems to just get more and more intense as time goes on. What do you make of that?
Well, it's getting more intense because it's not being fulfilled enough. One of the things I love to do is go on YouTube and look at the Sadhguru videos. He has so many of them. And I think he's really uplifting.
He's had a very positive effect on people. I've kind of just been aware of him peripherally, but I know people like him.
Wonderful. Yeah, he is truly wonderful. I do transcendental meditation, and I was am very enamored of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. I think he was just totally wonderful. And I put Sadhguru on the same level. You know, I feel the same about Sadhguru. And, you know, what do these people do on TikTok? Do they do tarot readings on TikTok?
I'm not sure. I'm too, the young people confuse me now. I find TikTok too confusing to give you a clear answer, but I think that, because I'm never on it and I just hear this kind of secondhand, but I think it's like readings or people like talking about the meaning behind a card or showing how to do a spread, you know, like very basic stuff.
You know, I decided I was going to try to get myself more exposure by going on TikTok.
Okay.
So I have about, maybe like 10 short videos on TikTok. And what they are is talking about Bach flower remedies and how they correspond to the different signs of the zodiac and what they'll do and how they'll help you.
Okay.
And I've thought about getting on TikTok and doing tarot videos, but I haven't figured out how to approach it, or I don't know.
I'm the wrong person to ask. I have no idea. It's like programming a VCR for me. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm so happy to hear you say that.
Why is that? You're not, you feel...
Because I'm just like, I'm in the same place as you are with it. And
yeah. I mean, I've spent my entire life on computers, but it's just like, I've got to the point now where it's like, I have no idea what this is. Like, it's just completely alienating. It's like watching manic Saturday morning cartoons for 7-year-olds hopped up on breakfast cereal. So.
Yes. Yeah.
Although I have noticed, I mean, not just TikTok, but social media itself has a tarot-like aspect to it, in the sense that like Instagram, Facebook, you know, you're scrolling and cards are coming up. You know, there's a random card. Each post is like a random card coming up, and you can kind of almost use it as a divination in a way sometimes.
I like that idea. I think that's great. And I have a friend who, what he does is, there's this woman on social media, and she does tarot readings, and he gets on there to find out what's really going on with Meghan and Harry.
Okay.
And she does tarot readings on Meghan and Harry. And
I bet those are super popular.
And it's like...
Is this on YouTube? Where is this?
Yeah, I think it's on YouTube. Okay. Yeah.
That's like got a
YouTube channel. 18
trillion views on it.
Yeah.
That sounds like it would be very popular. That's funny. So maybe to take it back to what we were talking about, you know, I think there's been a huge push, and it's wonderful since the 19th century, to turn tarot into not just a divination, but a spiritual tool. and it was Eliphaz Levi that united it with the Tree of Life. And I think that was, even if that didn't exist before, it's a beautiful thing that he did. It doesn't need to be right in tradition. I mean, I think it was incredible that what he did. So there's a lot of questions there. I mean, one question that emerges from that is, was tarot always supposed to be a spiritual tool? As people often claim it is. They say it comes from ancient Egypt. They say that it's the ancient original book of initiation, all this stuff. But as far as I can tell, the actual history tends to only kind of take it to the Middle Ages in France. And it was unclear. It just seems like it was basically playing cards or fortune-telling cards that became playing cards. Yeah. How do you, what are your thoughts on the origin of tarot? Where did it come from? Was it originally spiritual, or is that something that developed later?
Well, I have certain images in my mind of that are completely intuitive. They're not based in fact at all. But one of them has to do with the city of Fez in North Africa. And there's an element in that city that's very, very spiritual. And I have this vision about Kabbalists being there in Fez and putting together the tarot. So the main book of the tarot is the Zohar. Mm-hmm. And the Zohar is 22 volumes long.
And I didn't realize it was 22 volumes. That's super. Yes. I did not realize that. That's super interesting.
Yes.
And you relate that to the tarot arcana?
Yes, that's the major arcana.
Interesting.
I think that every volume of the Zohar corresponds to one of the cards of the major arcana.
Interesting. Okay.
And I think these scholars and holy people, wise people in Fez had something to do with putting together images on cards for the tarot.
You said this was a vision you had?
Yeah, just a constant feeling, something in my mind about that.
This is super. Do you know the whole thing about, I mean, stop me if you know this, but immediately when you said that, I mean, Fez in Morocco, I believe is where there were a ton of Jewish people there that migrated into southern Spain. And in the 12th century is where we get Lurianic Kabbalah. And that was basically Kabbalah is from Sephardic Jews that immigrated to Spain.
Oh, yeah, that feels so right. There's like a river going from Fez to Spain.
Is that a connection that you had made?
No, I'd never even thought about that.
That's interesting, right? It's so interesting. Like you were saying, I was asking you kind of how do you follow up on intuitions? And often this is how it works for me. It's like somebody will say something or I'll make a connection. And then I get all of my best information from Wikipedia. I'll look it up on Wikipedia and then I'll find some clarification. It is wonderful. Yeah. So that's that's really interesting. So that would suggest that it was a Jewish community in Morocco.
Yes.
And do you have a sense of,
feels like to me?
And you have a sense of that's where it was. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at a map and it looks like you could practically walk from the northern tip of Morocco to the southern tip of Spain, or certainly swim across. Yeah, it looks like you could, like a swimming pool, you could swim across. That's so interesting.
I've never heard anything about any tarot cards turning up in Spain, but then they turned up in Italy, or the earliest one.
That is fascinating. I feel like that's actually a huge major piece of information, if in fact, because that's something that we could look up and try and verify. So what was your sense, your vision was of people putting images on cards, or what was your sense of what was happening?
Yes. And I think one disturbing thing about the cards is, to me, and I'd like to know kind of what you think about this, the I Ching is almost like modern art. Those hexagrams look like modern art, like hard edge, minimalist things, whereas the tarot card has all these different symbols on it. And then different people put other symbols on. And then there are older symbols and newer symbols and like that. And it's almost like I think of the tarot as these walls that are just overwritten with graffiti kind of thing in a way. And on the one hand, it's all very rich. There's a richness of imaginativeness in that. But on the other hand, it's confusing. And then I think some of that imagery could be maybe wrong in that it doesn't really go with the card, doesn't fit. I don't know. So
then my question is, and this is something that maybe there's probably not an answer for, but my question is, how do you determine whether something is wrong or not for a card, or if not determine, what's the intuitive direction or trajectory to go in towards feeling whether something is more correct or not? Like, what's the criteria on whether something's accurate, basically?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I don't know so much if there's an answer to it. I think it would all be in the feeling. But then the feeling I have might be different from the feeling someone else has. I'll tell you one thing that's always bothered me a little bit is that switch between the 8 and 11 major arcana cards.
Which one is that?
Well, like in the weight deck, Arcanum 8 is the woman, the maiden with the lion.
Uh-huh.
And then the Justice card is given the number 11.
I didn't realize that was switched. I know about the switch in the Thoth deck with Zadi is not the star and all of that, but I didn't know that 9 and 11 had been... When were 9 and 11 switched?
8 and 11.
Oh, 8 and 11. When was that? Where and when was that?
I think that was the Golden Dawn that did that. Because the decks that predate the Golden Dawn have 11 as the lion and the maiden and 8 as the Justice card.
That is super interesting. I know that Eliphaz Levy was the one that that attributed to the tarot cards to the paths, but supposedly he intentionally mixed up the order to throw people off the true secrets or whatever. And
that's what I heard, yeah.
Yeah, and then I think the Golden Dawn redid it. But yeah, that's definitely... What is it in the Marseille deck?
In the Marseille deck, I'm almost certain that it's the 11 being the maiden and the 8 being Justice.
Huh. I don't know about that. That's super interesting, and that's something I'd like to know more about. That's a pretty big switch.
And of course, something that I've gotten, criticized before, a little bit recently and a whole lot in the past, was my attribution of the suit of swords to earth and the suit of coins to air.
Why did you make that change? That's pretty major.
Well, it goes along with the original book I read, the Church of Light Sacred Tarot book by C.C. Zane. And it also, I see it as going along with the Tatwa system in Buddhism, whereas the air is a blue circle. And so air would go with the coins, which are circles, whereas the yellow square goes with earth. And even though the swords are not square, they are in the form of crosses. They like little crosses because of that, of the hand guard,
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like it has 4 points. And also, I just like the symbology of earth is very, very dense. It's very dense, and it's the thickest element. And so to cut through that, you need the sword. Whereas the coins are symbols. They're like, they have pentacles on them sometimes. So right now we're exchanging coins in the form of words.
Interesting.
My words, your words, we're going back and forth, trading.
I like that.
Like that.
Yeah. I like that. Or like a board game.
Yes.
Or my favorite game is Go. You know this game?
I've always been fascinated with that.
It's a fascinating game.
Oh, yeah. And see, once again, you get into this thing where Go is very minimalistic. It's just a grid with black and white pieces. So it's kind of like those hexagrams, which are very minimalist.
It seems, from what I understand, Go, the I Ching, and the Tao Te Ching all stem from the same cultural period, and they're basically the same philosophy behind all three, as well as the art of war. Well, no, I think that comes way later. Never mind. I take that last bit back, although it's inspired by that.
That makes sense. So do you play Go?
Well, I've attempted to play Go. I mean, this game is so complex. It took, it took AI 15 years longer to beat Go than chess. So I've played Go, but I've never been able to convince anyone to get super into it with me, or met a really advanced Go player. Presumably, there's places I could go to if I really wanted to.
Yes.
And the I think there are places you can play online, but they're not very intuitive and they don't seem that fun. So what about you? It's something you've pursued?
Oh yeah, no, I've never played Go at all, but my partner and I own a Go board and a Go book in Japanese. And there's that novel by Kawabata about Go masters. I've never read it, but I love Kawabata's writing. There's something very mystical to me about Go. I love it.
I agree.
I don't know hardly anything about it.
I don't. I mean, but you can learn the rules in like 30 seconds.
I know. Yeah. That's great.
But I did hear at one point I believe there are rankings for Go players similar. I think there might be the same for chess. And I remember reading somewhere, if you study Go consistently for a year, the gap in skill between somebody who's even studied for a year and somebody who's just learning is basically uncrossable. Like, it's impossible for somebody to beat somebody with a year of Go experience if they're just starting. So there really is a learning curve on it. I've really wanted, if you want to get into it, and I'd love to find an online place to play if anyone plays. Like, I'll definitely play a game with you. But I've been obsessed with, I've been really into games and game theory for the last year. It's just fascinating to me. And
I love games.
I do too. I think they are a wonderful break from the stress of life, and they're a wonderful way to connect and learn. And I think go ahead.
Well, speaking of that, I want to ask you this question.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of strange that there's no card game. Like, chess starts out with equal sides.
Okay.
There's no card games that start out that way, is there?
Oh, meaning you're dealt different hands?
Yeah, like in bridge, everybody, you're dealt a random hand, and then you make the best of it. That's the nature of the game. But it seems like there would be card games where, okay, this person gets all the black cards, and this person gets all the red cards, and then you go from there.
Yeah, that would be a great setup. I mean, that's an easy enough setup. I wonder, yeah. It would be cool to make a game similar. I feel like it would be good to design a game similar to Stratego with that, where you could take like the court cards and put them on the equivalent of a Stratego board and play that way and flip them over. Stratego, where you have the tiles. It's like a Napoleonic era game.
Oh, no, I've never heard of that.
It's a game from the 18th century or 18th, 19th century that is still around. It's one of the kind of core popular games that's sold by Hasbro or whoever. And it's similar. It's kind of a cross. I would call it a cross between chess and Risk, but you have two armies set up on a grid, and the other player does not see who they are. I think, if I remember correctly, you see your army, and the idea is to capture the enemy team's flag, and you're doing that by you're pushing your pieces to fight pieces on the other team, but you don't know what they are. So then you flip both over. And so if we did this with cards, for instance, a king would beat a jack, but sometimes you hit a bomb, which blows up your person immediately. And so you have to keep doing that until you flip over tokens to get to the flag. Anyways, that seems like, it just occurred to me, that seemed like maybe something you could do Stratego with a deck of cards, maybe.
Yeah.
Or maybe even Battleship. Maybe you could do Battleship. I don't know.
Interesting. Yes. And there used to be, and there still is, of course, and I've read about it online, but I haven't tried it or worked with it, a game called Taroki, which uses the tarot cards.
Yeah, so I actually teach, I teach tarot at, I have a school called Magick Me, and I also have Lon Duquette, who you may know, writes a lot of books about tarot, has taught a course there. And in his course, he talks about that it was originally, Taroki was what tarot came from. It was or I think it was Taroki and Mamluk. There were two different games that evolved, that kind of merged together with Kabbalah to create, or whatever happened to create tarot. That's super interesting. So do you know much about that game and how it's played?
No, I know almost nothing about it. I just read that it existed online. I read about it.
Card games with tarot would be super interesting, or...
It would be.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be super interesting. I feel that games are an excellent way to learn anything. So...
oh, yeah. Yeah.
So what decks do you tend to favor?
Well, here, I have this one here. This is a real extreme one. So there's this Scandinavian artist named Hilma af Klint, a woman, and she did abstract painting. And these two women recently had a show in New York, and they have done a whole tarot deck, and they say it's channeled from Hilma af Klint. And so here,
that's super cool.
The abstract futures deck.
Whoa, that looks super cool. It's a futurist art.
Yeah.
By Hilma's Ghost.
By Hilma's Ghost.
That's great. Yes. Tarot decks are such an awesome art form. I mean, I feel like it's a great thing to collect as well.
Yes. And here's kind of what the cards look like. This is Like this is the Knight of Pentacles.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. So
Yeah,
for people who
I
are
love
just,
it.
that's so cool. That's like Tattva art, modernist Tattva art. So for people who are just hearing this as a podcast, what is this deck? It's called the Abstract Futures deck.
The Abstract Futures deck. And
It's super cool.
yeah,
I love that. That's super cool.
yeah, these are great. And they kind of free my mind because there's no objects in them, there's no people in them.
Yeah.
There are these abstract patterns.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. The only drawback to this deck is it's a limited edition deck, and the deck cost $100.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
And
looks
I
worth
really
it though.
wish-
Looks worth it even as an art object for a coffee table.
I would love it if Intertraditions, who published my tarot book, would publish an edition of that deck.
Do they do tarot decks?
Yeah, I think they do. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they do.
That's cool.
And they do other kinds of decks too, like decks that are not 78 cards, but like, Oracle decks and things like that.
Intertraditions is also my publisher, so I end up interviewing a ton of Intertraditions people on this podcast.
Did they publish the John D book?
Yes, they did. Yeah. Yeah. You know about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Funny story about that book.
Yes, please.
So I was looking you a couple of days ago online, and I saw that you'd written this book on John D. So then I have on my Kindle, on my phone, I have like 500 books, maybe. And I noticed that book, your John D book, I had purchased it a couple of years ago.
Well, thank you.
And I never read it.
Okay.
But I do this all the time. I will get the intuition I need to have something. And a lot of what I buy that I don't read are things that are of extreme high quality, which I would consider your book to be.
Thank you.
And I thought it was so funny that I owned that book and didn't. And so last night I was reading in it, and I thought, wow, this is really good. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
I can't wait to read that whole book.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a great book.
Yeah, I wrote that book to basically for myself to try and understand the full picture of not just John Dee, but the Western esoteric tradition. And that's why there's a lot of stuff in that book about 12th century Spain and reading about that and about how kind of esotericism went from there to the Italian city states. I didn't like that stuff is super fascinating. Like, cause for me, like, reading New Age stuff or tarot, astrology, I Ching have always to some extent been fairly historically disconnected for me, because it's not the same thing as if like you convert to Christianity, there's a known history there. If you convert to Judaism, there's a known history there, and so on and so forth. With esotericism, magic, whatever you want to call it, it's kind of just scattered piecemeal and disconnected from any historical reality. But there is a historical reality. It's like there's a specific role that this thing has played in Western civilization. It's connected with, for instance, migration patterns of the Jewish diaspora, the history of the church, the history of religious conflict in the church, the history of colonization. It's like tied up with all of this stuff. And it's just like fascinating.
Yes. And of course, I think one of the problems too is like, for instance, even like with the Nazis, a lot of those historians that would write about the occult, the Nazis' involvement with the occult, they didn't believe any of that stuff, and they didn't really relate to it. So when they wrote about it, you get this picture that's not clear,
You're talking about Nazis who wrote about the occult, or people who've written about Nazi?
People who later wrote about it. And
I see.
They wrote about it from this kind of intellectual standpoint of, whereas more and more, I think we're getting a clearer and clearer picture of what they really were into. Because
you're talking about Nazi occultism?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So that's definitely not what I was talking about. So tangent, but just to divorce those two things, I was actually talking about the spread of Kabbalah. But yeah. Oh, but in terms of what were you going to say about the Nazi occultism?
Oh, just that we haven't seen it clearly because these historians have kind of rejected it out of hand because they don't believe any of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I was saying in the John D book. I think the deal with the Nazis is basically, I think it was largely propaganda and crowd control for them, because they Hitler looked at all of that stuff, the Arianosophy and the runology and all of that, but they put all those people in concentration camps because I think that what they wanted was to get some veneer of power or the symbology to make them look larger than life. But the actual policy of the Nazis was, if your attention is on anything except the Fuhrer, you're going in a camp. So, and they didn't like, they put Freemasons, I'm a Freemason, so I would have gone in a camp, for lots of reasons. But, anyone, I think that they saw occultism as any occultism that they didn't control as a threat. So I don't consider Nazi occultism outside of Himmler, there were a couple people like Himmler and Alfred Rosenberg who were pretty out, and they were clearly out to lunch as well. But, and then Guido von List, not Guido von List, that's earlier. But I think by and large, it was just kind of state propaganda.
Yes, they were twisting things to suit their ends. Yes. And, they love Richard Wagner because they were trying to do an opera, and they liked his sets and costumes and myths,
Yeah. Plus he was also a hardcore anti-Semite, so that helped.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is definitely endlessly fascinating and often very, very disturbing to look back through history and see where this stuff kind of weaves in and out.
Yes.
But that said, so sometimes it's good to divorce esotericism from history, and tarot on its own is its own thing and is very pure and innocent, it seems. So that's good.
Yes. Yes.
So if someone's just getting into the tarot, I have two questions for you. One is, if someone's just getting, and we can go one at a time. One is, and I think these are my last questions. One is, if somebody is getting interested in tarot, how can they begin a practice? And then my second question, and you don't have to answer this, I'll remind you after the first question, is if somebody is advanced in tarot, like they've been studying it for 10 years, at that point, how do they deepen their practice, and what are good ways for people to push themselves out of their comfort zone to grow? So my first question is, how do people get into tarot who want to be into it?
You mean like, say, what books would they?
Sorry, that's probably way too much information.
No.
Not necessarily books, but if somebody listens to this podcast and feels called to get into tarot,
yes.
What do you recommend? Where should they start?
Well, you might start by just studying like one card a day. I'm very sold, like on my own system. I feel like if there's a system out there that is more cohesive than mine, or even as cohesive as mine, I'd like to see it. I think the way I sew everything together is very harmonious. It totally makes sense to me,
Awesome.
I think meditating on the cards and maybe journaling about them is such a good idea, is a great thing to do. Finding a community too, finding other people and then discussing the cards, and then doing readings for people and writing down the cards that you get.
Okay.
And then maybe even writing out the interpretations you feel, or, how you feel those cards answer the questions that you're asking.
And then looking back as time goes on.
Yes. And another thing I'm very interested in doing is using the tarot the same way you would use astrology. In fact, I've had this image of shuffling the deck and then turning the cards one by one, all 78, and writing down what you're getting, writing down the order of cards you got. You do this for a person, and this would mirror, the question would be, tell me about this person's destiny or this person's being. And so, for instance, Arcanum 1 has to do with mind. Whatever card you got first would mirror their mind. Arcanum 2 is Virgo, and whatever card you get for that would mirror, that. In other words, so you can interpret the whole deck, kind of like as a replacement for their astrology chart.
Very interesting. Super interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard of anyone doing that before.
Yeah, it would be elaborate and extensive.
Well, that's good. That's good
But
sometimes.
then the nice thing about that too is you could tune into that piecemeal. It wouldn't matter. You could say, oh, I just want to look at these few cards here and see where they fall.
Excellent.
You wouldn't have to interpret the whole thing necessarily.
I like that. So how about somebody who's maybe got 10 years of experience and wants to push themselves out of their comfort zone? What would you recommend then?
Studying more astrology, getting more into the math.
When you say math, do you mean like the gematria or?
Gematria is a fabulous way of studying the tarot. Take words and add up the letters of the word and see what you get. And then to try to understand how that relates to what you're dealing with. Yeah, so numbers is a path. Another path is astrology, to study astrology and then relate that back to the tarot.
Excellent.
That would be another way of enriching knowledge of the tarot.
Yeah, it definitely seems to me that tarot, Kabbalah, and astrology are all basically the same thing. I mean, you kind of got to study all of them. Numerology, or specifically Kabbalistic numerology. Excellent. Yes. I do have one last kind of random question. What do you think of Paul Foster Case?
I've read some of his works. He was like an American actor, wasn't he?
I didn't know that. I definitely know he's buried in a cemetery in Glendale in Los Angeles, which is where a ton of actors are buried, as well as Paramahansa Yogananda is also buried there. So
I remember very little about him, but tell me, why are you asking this? Because I'd like to know what you're thinking.
Basically, I'm only just asking it because it popped into my head. But I ask it, I guess, just because Paul Foster Case is so widely considered to be kind of the authority on tarot in history, and that so many people who get seriously into tarot study his work and maybe even take that Boda Builders of the Adidium correspondence course that they teach tarot through. Kind of fielding it just popped into my head to ask you, basically.
Yes. So I was so much more connected to the Church of Light, so I knew about Paul Foster Case, and a long time ago, I read a good amount of his writings, but I don't really know that much about him.
I'm just going to look him up real quick because I know I believe he was Golden Dawn, but he was pretty hardcore Theosophist. I could be wrong. I just want to make sure I'm getting this right.
You make me want to go back and read more about him now.
He's definitely an interesting guy. Yeah, he's also come under some, I think, probably deserved criticism because when he was doing this stuff in the ages of 20 to 24, he did a lot of very paranoid warnings to people that the occult, or specifically pranayama, would destroy their lives, and they're probably produced by him incorrectly doing yoga, and then blaming that even though he didn't do it correctly. Anyways, I was just looking up to see if he was an actor, and I don't see any of that. I could be wrong though.
Who am I thinking of? There's somebody I'm thinking of. They were in the movie Showboat. Who I'm thinking of. I don't know.
Showboat. The one from 1927?
Yeah, like it was old.
Is tarot a theme in this?
No, but there's somebody that was in that movie that was a prominent practitioner of tarot.
I'll tell you what, I'm just going to ask AI. Maybe GPT will know. Who was the occultist that appeared in the 1927 movie Showboat? 2 words. Not Showbore. I wrote Showbore. Hopefully it knows what I'm talking about. Well, you know that there was Alban Grau was a very high up occultist in the Fraternis Aeternitae that did all of the set design for the movie Nosferatu in the 20s.
Oh yeah, I love that movie.
It's a great movie. Yeah, so that's why there's all the occult kind of set decorations in that are accurate. Okay, this is not working, and I don't want to just sit here waiting for it. So it's an open question.
I'll look forward to it, and if I find it, I'll send it to you.
Or if anyone who listens to this, please email with the answer. All right.
Yes.
Well, John, this was a phenomenal conversation. I apologize again for it took so many times to get the conversation going, but
No,
thank you
that's
very
okay.
much. Okay.
That's okay. I really enjoyed speaking with you. It was great.
Me too. And thank you for the nice things you said about my book. And I wish you great luck with your book. Please tell people, Soul Journey Through the Tarot, please tell people where they can get it and where they can find out more about you.
Well, they can get it through Amazon.com. I think it's on the Walmart website too. Yeah, and you can get it from my own website, which is johnsandbach.net. Plus, I've written another book called Astrology, Alchemy, and the Tarot, which is about the major arcana. That can be obtained from my website and from Amazon, as well as also the other books I've written. I've written novels and I've written a lot of poetry.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, AI just came through and it said there does not appear to be a well-known occultist associated with Showboat. But what does AI know? What does AI know? That it may not be correct. So
what am I thinking of? I'll have to look through that.
I don't know. Curious. All right. Well, great conversation. Wishing you great luck with the book and talk to you later.
Well, thank you very much. You have a wonderful day.
You
I'll
too.
see you.
Okay. Bye, John.
Bye.
All right. Hope you really, really enjoyed that. I definitely had a lot of fun in that conversation. Meet us at magick.me, magick.me, my school for magic, meditation, and mysticism, where you can learn all the skills you need to unleash your true self. I will see you in class, and until next time, hang in there.